On the agenda.
Good afternoon. This is the meeting of the Land Use Committee on April 4th, 2024. I'm Councilmember Jay Rosapepe. I've asked Councilmember Scott Diener to chair this meeting in case I need to leave for a minute. So I'll turn over this meeting to Scott.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and introduce ourselves? I'm Scott Diener, Councilmember 3.
I'm Eric Warden, Council Member 4.
Jim
Okay.
Fisk, Principal Planner.
And Nick Bond, Community Development Director. And I was just trying to message Jim to ask him to let Angela into the meeting. She's in the attendees side.
I did. She declined to become a panelist. So,
All right. Oh, now she's raised her hand.
oh, there we go.
She
Go ahead,
probably
Angela.
wants us to try again.
I'll try again.
Angela, can you hear us?
She's rejoining.
All right.
Can't hear her.
We don't hear you yet, but Angela Garcia is our Deputy Director and Building Official. And I'd like to ask the chair, just out of respect for Angela's time, we have one item on the building code on the agenda. I'd like to try to get that out of the way so that Angela doesn't have to sit through a whole bunch of extra topics that she doesn't need to be here for.
Okay, any objections to that from anyone? It's a pretty quick issue, I believe.
I'm good.
I'm good.
Okay, let's start then. Well, first of all, are there any other changes to the agenda?
None.
Hearing none, then let's go to item number 5 first. And we can learn about building code changes.
Yeah, I'll kick it off and then hand it off to Angela for the technical stuff. But the state building code went into effect on March 15th, the new 2021 codes. And so every time we adopt the new state codes, there's typically some cleanup concerning our local amendments to those codes. And so Angela worked with our attorney to prepare an ordinance. It was actually ready to go to council last week, but I felt like it should go to a committee for discussion before we bring it to the council when nobody's seen it previously. And so this is just an opportunity for you to see the red line changes and ask any questions. And I think Angela can probably give you a quick summary of the changes. I don't think there's anything significant in terms of substance here. There's a lot of things that were renumbered in the state code that now our references are old, or the state has modified things, and we're just matching our language to the state building code. And Angela, I'll let you share anything further.
Well, real quick, like it's page 140 of the revised packet for people that are searching out that element.
Thank you.
Okay, Angela, show's yours. And
I
nice
think
to meet
Angela
you.
might be having audio problems.
Oh,
There's probably a window somewhere that is asking her to use computer audio or something like that. Well, in any event, I can probably tackle these, Angela, if you can't find the or figure out how to get audio here. Essentially, as I mentioned, we have a handful of sections. I think the first red line changes on 142, where we have made local amendments to the International Building Code, the International Residential Code, and the International Fire Code. And so the first changes on 142, we are just changing our code to match exactly verbatim what is in the state adopted codes. On page 144 of the packet, there was a big debate at the State Building Code Council about whether sound transit, fixed guideway transit was subject to building codes, and so they determined that it was. And so there is now an exception for group A3 occupancies for transit type facilities, and an old reference for sports areas was actually removed from the state building code. Angela, any luck on audio? Very strange. again, moving into page 145, looks like she might try to rejoin here. There you'll see in several areas there's this exception dealing with participant sport areas, and whether concerning fire area and fire suppression systems. There's also references consistently through the document concerning mattress or upholstered furniture manufacturing, and I think storage, where the state has deleted these particular code provisions. And Angela, do you have audio now?
Maybe Angela, if she can hear us, she can use her phone like I did that one time when I was struggling. It worked pretty slick for me. So
Yeah, you can always call in, Angela, with your
Yeah.
phone to the number on the Zoom link. There were some changes to Group S1 occupancies shown on page 146. Again, we're just implementing what is in the state building code. There was a addition on page 147 concerning storm shelters as part of the, I believe this is the exemption work that does not require a permit. They added the word other than storm shelters, which do require a permit. Let's see here, page in the IRC, which I believe yeah, IRC beginning on page 147, but if you go to 149, we are removing the local amendments concerning fire sprinkler systems. Previously, we followed the county's lead on something that is now inconsistent with the state building code, and so we are striking the local amendment that we had adopted and will instead rely on what is in the state building code. And Angela looks like she is almost on. Does anybody remember it? Is it like *4? There we go. She's on.
there we go.
So Angela, I just got to the IRC amendments where we deleted the fire sprinkler amendments for 1 and 2 family dwellings.
Yes.
And my recollection was that was the county had adopted local amendments years ago, and we followed their lead. We are, and I believe both the county and the city are backing off of those amendments and will now rely on the state code language. Is that correct?
Yeah, so what that was a carryover from previous code cycles. We have adopted Appendix B in the IFC that addresses fire sprinkler requirements for structures under the IRC and the IBC based on fire flow, in addition to other there's other triggers that will generate fire sprinklers, but that square footage requirement that was previously referenced is now cleaned up by referencing Appendix B and what those available fire flows are.
All right, thank you. Moving on to page 150 and 151. Probably 5 or 6 years ago, we had some debate with the old fire marshal on fire area, and there was a local amendment in our code that talked about whether roof eaves are or are not included in fire area calculations. And so we are repealing that local amendment. We believe that the codes as written have adequate clarity, and there is not a need to have modified that section.
Yeah, so we are going back to the definition in the International Fire Code and the International Building Code for fire area, which ties into the requirements, and it flows with the code requirements, so we don't have any weird ripple effects.
All right, thank you. And then the final amendment, I believe this is in section 503 of the fire code. It incorrectly listed public works standards rather than the title of our document, which is Public Works Engineering Standards. And actually, I think that should be Public Works Engineering Standards and Specifications. So that's I just caught that, and we will make sure that the final version that comes to you includes that change.
That,
Um,
Nick, that is the title of the document. I looked it up on Public Works website, and
Okay.
that is the title of the document, so that's correct.
Then we might have it titled incorrectly in a different section of code, so it's possible that they changed their title page without telling us.
Okay.
Let's see, then in Appendix D, there's a one reference to gates, and we have clarified that, I believe, to be again consistent with Appendix D as it exists in the IFC. The state actually hasn't adopted Appendix D of the fire code. We've adopted portions of it, but this particular section was written in a way that was not consistent with the international code version. And so it went from saying gates shall be of the swinging or sliding type to gates shall be of the horizontal swing, horizontal slide, vertical lift, or vertical pivot type. So when you have a gate that provides access, fire access, there are actually 4 types that can be used. And I believe, you'll see that there's one section in strike through in this red line version, but that's actually not going away. It just, we're not changing that. And so I think that was a change we just needed to accept because it is remaining the same. Is that correct, Angela, concerning penalties and other relief?
That was my
That's
question.
correct. That's not changing in our municipal code. Charlie made a strike through that because there were no amendments being made to that section. So it'll remain unchanged.
Yeah, so we just
Oh.
needed to accept that change before the red line copy went out. And so we'll clean that one up
Okay.
before it goes to council as well. So our intent is to bring this ordinance to the council on May 14th for approval. And wanted to see if you all had any questions.
Seemed pretty straightforward to me. I had a question about the penalty section and you addressed that.
No, sounds good to me as well.
All right, thank you very much. And Angela, have a nice afternoon. You don't have to stick around if you don't want to.
Thank you for your patience with my technical difficulties. You guys have a good evening.
Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Okay. We can jump back to item number 1, the social pinpoint results.
Sure, yeah, as you all are aware, we had a policy workshop for the periodic update on February 28th. It was pretty well attended. What we did was we took everything that was in the council chambers and put it on Social Pinpoint and left kind of a survey open through the end of March. And so we provided a short summary of those results in your packet, but we had pretty good participation. So we had 92 unique visitors, and they provided 48 responses. The majority of those comments were transportation related. It asked some open-ended questions. So we can take those comments that were made and kind of address those as we move forward with the drafting of the elements. So those elements, we'll discuss some of those next. We should have the first draft in front of the Planning Commission beginning of June, and then a public hearing scheduled for the end of June. And that should take care of our deliverables to the Department of Commerce as part of the grant. But the Social Pinpoint, it allowed us to get a lot more insight to what the community's feeling and getting some good feedback. So a very valuable tool that we kind of had to happen upon at the beginning of our public outreach process. And so we've really migrated online, and it allows us to capture these metrics and really report back what the community's feedback is. So.
Hey, Jim?
If I could add to that, I just wanted to mention that there's several pages with graphs, and those are showing, we ask people to rate how the city is doing on each of these factors. And so, when 10 is we're doing really well, 1 is we're doing poorly. And so it was really a way to gauge relative to our existing policies, how are we doing and which ones do we really need to focus more on? And so it took me a minute to figure out what this graph was showing me. At first, I thought we only had one total respondent.
So my question is there anything that stood out at you right now that, I mean, jumped out, something that you weren't expecting in the response?
Not for me, really. I think it's a lot of what we've already heard as being at the farmers market. It was just kind of more of the same, which that's good. That means we're hearing what we need to hear.
I
Yeah.
like the emphasis on parks, the positive feedback on that.
Mhm.
And I also like the concept, it was mentioned, I hadn't heard it before, of the 15-minute city, where your services that you would ordinarily need are available within 15-minute walk.
There are some great articles about that online. If you do a Google search on the 15-minute city,
Mhm.
you'll find some very interesting information.
Also potentially some conspiracy theories. But
True.
the thing that surprised me was, I was surprised at how well people thought we were doing on some of these items, because I work on these things all the time, and in some cases I keep thinking we need to do more on this. So I was actually surprised that people thought we were doing as well as we are in some areas, given the number of responses. So that was
Yeah,
good to
I
see.
by following it was pretty impressed with the positive aspects of it. I've been involved in these kind of workshops, open houses, public input before, and 84 site visits I've had to make in a quick amount of time based off of the responses. And they weren't positive numbers like you guys are getting right here. So great work. It's a lot of work and a lot of positiveness that people brought forth. So
The transportation questions and reviews or ratings are interesting.
There's one comment in there, since you brought up the transportation, and it talks about focusing on improving pedestrian bicycling in the city, and so we've kind of heard both ends of that, but it's good to see that people are promoting that type of thing.
Yeah. Any other discussion?
I'm
Good
good.
work. All right. Item number 2. Comp plan update.
Okay, so in your packet, we've provided the land use section, well, the draft land use section, housing, climate, and the capital facilities element. We introduced these to the Planning Commission at the beginning of this month, and as you know, we're bringing every element that the Planning Commission reviews to you. And so we've gotten some feedback from the Planning Commission. That's all been distributed to our consultant over the last 3 or 4 months. I mean, you all have done a lot of work on this. And so we're putting together a matrix of all the comments, how some may be applicable, some may not be. In this matrix, which we anticipate probably in the second week of May being complete, we'll be able to address all the comments to each one of these elements. So the land use and housing elements, obviously, those are very closely related. There's a lot of work being done in both of those elements related to all the middle housing bills that legislature passed last summer. So there's quite significant work in there. Capital facilities element also received quite a bit of attention. And so we are still putting numbers together for the capital facilities element. But our consultant did a great job in meeting with all the department heads and listening to all of the department's needs going forward. So kind of feel like that element is going to be in a good spot come the beginning of June. The climate element, we are not required to adopt this element at this point, but we're being proactive and we'll adopt this climate element. Well, we're hopeful to adopt this climate element And that way, when we come to our midpoint check-in in 2029, we'll have something that we've been working with and see how it needs to be revised if it does. And we're still kind of waiting on some guidance from the Department of Commerce regarding the climate element. So we're kind of on the front foot of this. So if you all have comments on any of this, and obviously this isn't your only opportunity, this will go, like I said before, to the Planning Commission in June, public hearing, end of June. And then that's when we start a little bit more work with the council and some additional revisions in the fall. We will need to get all of it to the Department of Commerce, probably August or September for a 60-day review. The whole thing should be wrapped up by the end of December. It has to be. So we are accepting comments through May 7th, which is the next Planning Commission meeting, so that we can get all of those comments in that matrix I talked about earlier, and then address those. So if you have any comments, feel free to send them to me, and I'll make sure that they're handled.
So
And
I know
this is
that-
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that this is kind of the first, we're introducing as many revisions as possible as we are able to at this point. There's still a few works in progress. We're still working on our transportation model. We're still working on our housing target piece, and some land capacity related issues. And so that additional information that our consultants are still putting together will also add to the number of changes that are in this chapter, but we've basically given you everything that we can up to this point. This is the first review. We'll go through the full matrix, as Jim mentioned, after comment periods close on the 7th, and then we're going to release a complete second draft that adds kind of the transportation piece as well as the planning for housing at all income levels piece, and then there will be a sort of a second review on a much closer to finished product. And it is our hope that we won't have a whole bunch of comments then on that second review. We're hoping to head all of these things off now, even though unfortunately we don't have as much information from our consultant as we would like.
Okay. So one of my questions is, if we were to engage in a more active review of the draft comp plan, what would you recommend we look at first, second, and then third? And then alternatively, I don't know how my peers feel about this, but maybe we each take a chapter. So that we can say that we've done our review. So up for discussion, but what is most important to be looked at in your opinion, Nick?
Well, I think that a couple of key pieces of information have been discussed with council already, or at least the transportation committee, but understanding the projects that go on the tip.
Yeah.
Capital facilities is majorly overhauled, and we're still working on capital facilities, but it's probably the biggest rewrite of any of the chapters that we have. So I would encourage that everybody look at capital facilities, because in order for the city to spend money on projects, those projects have to be identified in our capital facilities plan. So that's where the rubber meets the road in terms of when budget time comes and you want to implement your priorities. I think everybody needs to read capital facilities. Housing is really important, but a lot of the things that are in the housing element are mandated. And so I think it's important to understand these issues and be able to explain them to the public. But in terms of providing input or steering things one way or another, we don't have as much flexibility as some would probably like. And we're mostly just trying to comply with the rules and regs. And then for land use, you've already seen the zoning map that we talked about at the last work study meeting, and that's really the extent of significant land use changes that we're talking about. And I think Eric maybe hasn't heard this quite as many times as Scott and Jay, but we have growth targets that we have to meet. Those are addressed in the land use element and explained. But again, there's not a whole lot of change in land use. I think you just need to be able to understand. It's important to be able to understand it and communicate it to the public, more so than we're looking for specific additions.
And
Okay.
question. I read, I think it's like 1.65, something like that percent that you need to have for growth to maintain with the county growth plan, roughly ballpark, something like that. Um, so I kind of been looking into that a little bit, trying to educate myself on previous numbers, and last 4 years they're all over the place, you know. So that's kind of hard for me, someone like myself, to get a good judge. If I recall right, a couple minutes ago, you mentioned um, planning for housing based off of income level. Did you mention that? Okay, so
Correct.
my question would be, um, to educate myself and everybody, and maybe someone who's watching, because I am new to this. How do you base that off of? Would it be like multi-housing, threeplex, duplex, apartments, the size of the home, which is kind of misleading because some of these homes in the McCormick area are smaller lots, but the finishes are pretty expensive. Property size, density, zoning. How do you plan for something like that?
So I think that you know, it's certainly a lot easier now that we have these middle housing mandates, because middle housing is, as long as it's allowed in the majority of your zones, that sort of meets the 80 to 100% AMI level. Apartments are 50% to 100% AMI. Single family houses are 120% adjusted median income. So single family really isn't doing anything for affordability. There's no single family house that's being built now, other than maybe Housing Kitsap products that are really helping with affordability. So what the state is looking for is that they're not looking at the size of individual buildings that are being built so much as the type of building. And anything below 50%, you're looking at subsidized housing. And so as long as you allow it in your code, they're not necessarily expecting the city to build it, but you do have to allow it in enough areas that it can actually theoretically be built. And it's up to Housing Kitsap, it's up to the state, it's up to other entities to actually produce that housing. We just have to make sure the zoning code allows it.
Okay, I'm definitely following that. Yeah, I was kind of confused on how do you direct that, because um, my son's young. They have really good careers, him and his wife, and they're looking to buy. And obviously, there's a lot of factors that go into that with interest rates and everything else. But the numbers that you gave out in January were eye-popping, on the size of the homes that were being built. And so I didn't know if that played into trying to make homes affordable or not, but I'm learning.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a factor, but basically, I think what the law was aimed at, which this law came out in 2020, then there was a subsequent middle housing law in 2022 or 2023. I forget what years all these things were approved by the legislature. But the initial requirement was really aiming at cities that have extensive single family only zoning and don't allow for any other housing types. And so if you're a city that is 80% of your land is residential and only allows for single family housing, you have not met the burden. But Port Orchard's code already allows for these middle housing types. We have a ton of land for apartments, and all the apartment construction that you've seen in the last 4 years, we've probably already met our target for planning for the 50 to 100% range because of the apartment construction we've seen, because our planning period is from 2020 through 2044. And so all the last 3.5 years count towards meeting our target. And we have, I think, probably already met our target on those housing types.
Do you see the 50% increase to the 10,500 by 2044? Do you predict that? Do you see that?
I do. I think we are going to exceed that. And you mentioned the 1.6% annual growth rate. What we did is we looked at the growth that we've had since 2020 and through our April 2023 population number.
Yeah.
We would only have to grow at 1.6% annually to meet our target. Since I've been here, we have not grown at a rate, I think, less than 2 or 2.2%. So we would have to have 20 years of a historically low growth rate in order for us not to hit that target. I think we're likely to exceed it, but I also see that a lot of the easy to develop land in the city is being developed. And so we are going to become more constrained in terms of easy to develop land. But McCormick is
Everywhere.
going to keep going for another 10 years. So I have no doubt that we'll hit the 10,500.
Awesome. Thank you.
And
So, oh, go ahead.
yeah, no, just on the growth side, you know, with the target, I think you gentlemen covered it pretty quickly is, yeah, we have been exceeding it and we are going to exceed the growth management side. So it's really a question of the housing types that developers just choose to bring in. But as you said, Nick and Jim, we have we've given the alternatives in our code, and that's the best that we can do right now. And then it becomes a
Yeah.
business decision.
Yeah, and I would have liked to have seen more middle housing over the last 4 years, and so I think there are some improvements that we could we have a middle housing bill that we have to comply with by July of 2025. So I think there are still some barriers to middle housing that we could remove and make that easier. We're definitely hitting the apartments, we're hitting the houses, the duplex, triplex, townhomes. We're going to get a little bit of that out of the McCormick Village area that we talked about at council last night. That's really starting to go to move forward pretty quickly here. But I don't know that we're going to get enough middle housing out of that one project to satisfy kind of our entire target for middle housing units. So it's our hope that we can make some additional tweaks to our code to make those things even easier and get builders who are interested in taking on those types of projects.
Thank you.
So Nick, do we have incentivization programs for more affordable housing? I know that we can't require it as a component to a development, but we can incentivize it and do that through a DA, I suppose. But do we have programs like that in place to help with what might be considered below 50 AMI?
We don't. One of the recommendations that we talked about when we repealed the multifamily tax exemption program, one of the, we talked about 4 different uses for multifamily tax exemptions, and one of them would be to offer the MFTE program for small middle housing types, those 0 to 12 unit or 0 to 10 unit projects. So where you have a lot in the city where you maybe have enough room for 4 or 6 units, but the economics of doing a middle housing project, it just isn't feasible when you account for having to buy a house, tear it down, and redevelop. That was one of the tax incentives that our housing action plan recommended was let's try to help more of those small scale projects happen rather than only getting these huge apartment complexes with 100 or 200 units. And let's, we talked about Givens Park and how there's going to be some rezoning around the south and east side of the park. That's an ideal place where you're going to have some small middle housing projects, but it has to be economically viable. And I just think the cost of tearing down a house is still too high in Port Orchard to really justify the upfront acquisition cost when you look at construction and interest rates and everything else. It's, that's something that would probably push those projects over the top.
So in my neighborhood, we have several in McCormick communities that have they're basically duplexes, right? They have fancy names for them, but they're 2-bedroom duplexes. Very, very well kept, and they're very desirable. They sell as fast as they go on the market. They'll sell the very first day. A lot of seniors really like those. People who are starting out, those are desirable for them as well. I just really wish that we'd start building more of those. And it's not really just duplexes, it's duplex communities that they're affordable, and they really serve a great purpose for seniors. They serve a great purpose for young couples that are just starting out, and I wish more builders would get on board with that. I get it's not the high ticket dollar item, but at the same time, it's very practical in today's world that we're working with. So that's my 2 cents on that.
All right. And then Nick, the last chapter that we didn't really talk about, I mean, you gave us a briefing on climate change, but in terms of the climate element and reviewing that, those are just model policies, right, at this point? So that,
Yeah, so the legislature now mandates a climate element in the comprehensive plan,
Yeah.
but our deadline for a climate element actually isn't until 2029. And so
Yeah.
when this was being talked about and we were writing our grant application, we said, well, there's climate policies in the regional planning policies at PSRC, there's climate policies in our countywide planning policies. Let's do something on climate, but unfortunately, Commerce hasn't completed their guidance on what's going to be required in 2029. So this is really just kind of a first try at doing it, at having some climate policies in one place within our code. But it's in the absence of a lot of guidance from Commerce, we're really just following the countywide planning policies and the multi-county planning policies and taking into consideration our local issues, which includes, flooding and sea level rise issues downtown. So we have to have a greenhouse gas emission policy adopted in order to apply for federal funding at PSRC. So there's a handful of things that are addressed in that element, but I expect that will become a much longer and more robust chapter when Commerce provides guidance and when we do our 5-year check-in in 2029.
okay. So that's another fast review. All right.
That is correct.
Anything else on the comp plan? Seeing
Jim, I did
none?
let everybody know last night that our comp plan workshop is on the 9th. It's the night of the 9th, right?
Yes, it's 6 o'clock. You're
6
at 5
o'clock,
o'clock
perfect.
because
All
you're
right.
expected to be there before the public.
All right. Yeah, a reminder would be good because 10-1 will have several council members there. Just to back up the bus for a second, any impediments right now to the schedule to get us submitted on time?
Well, I think our biggest impediment is that our consultant and probably every consultant in the state has so much work from all the grants and mandates that are out there. It has been hard getting our deliverables in enough time for us to review them before they go to the planning commission. So I think the timelines have slipped a little bit. I still think we're going to be able to get this done by the end of the year, but it might be a more we might be talking about a lot of comp plan at the same time we're talking about budget, which is going to keep you guys busy this fall. So that's unfortunate. I had hoped to have things wrapped up a little bit sooner, but I still think that we can get all of this done.
Is there anything you need
by the
from us?
deadline.
Is there anything you need from us at this time?
No, I don't think so. I would just encourage you to get your comments in early and I think the thing that could derail this is if we have significant issues with the finished product when we're trying to go to adoption in October, November. And those are the types of things that could make us miss our deadline and not get certified.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Missing middle housing memo.
Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of time back tonight because we put the next two items, the middle housing and the zoning map, on this agenda before we knew that things would go so smoothly at council. And so I think the council discussed this and pretty well provided direction. So I don't see a need to discuss this further at land use unless something was left unsaid at the council meeting work study a week and a half ago.
Okay.
No.
Okay,
Okay. Zoning map.
That's the same thing. Middle housing and zoning map we've dealt with.
Okay. Building code. Oh, non-conforming uses and structures. So this was first mentioned by Fred, and I was trying to recall where we ran into this issue before, and I think it was in the neighborhood behind Lowe's.
Correct. Meeline
Okay.
Road is one area. It's a little bit different situation than this one, but I just wanted to make sure that the land use committee understands, where our policy is at and why it's written the way that it is. When you have a non-conforming use or a non-conforming building type, that's like You know, if you have a house in on a piece of property that's zoned industrial, our code does not allow you to add on to that house or continue it if the building is destroyed. You have a very limited window to rebuild if there's a fire or some disaster. But the code is really written to implement the comprehensive plan and not prolong non-conforming uses any longer than the city has to. That of course creates, you know, some difficulties with a handful of residents and property owners every year, where they come in and they want to do something at their property and they find out that they're non-conforming, and there really isn't any relief in our code for that situation other than potentially seeking a rezone and or a comprehensive plan amendment. And so with My Line Road, that was a very unique situation because we had annexed that area in 2009 or 2010. The property owners, for whatever reason, when they annexed, petitioned to be zoned commercial. They didn't understand the non-conforming rules, and then you had like 3 people on that street that then were trying to do things. And of course, there's no sewer, there's no water on that street. It isn't set up for commercial development because the properties are all accessed by a rural road that goes through the rural county and then comes back into the city, and there's critical areas. So we had been advocating for that to change to residential for a long time, but the residents kept saying, no, we don't want to be residential. We want this commercial. It's more valuable. Finally, after a few people had difficulties, they understood why we were recommending single family, and ultimately we amended the comprehensive plan and rezoned those areas to single family. When other property owners have these sorts of issues, you know, the option is they can apply for a rezone or a comprehensive plan amendment. And, you know, that's a time-consuming process. You can only amend the comprehensive plan once per year. And the application has to be filed prior to January 31st every year in order to be considered. So it can take, you know, if it's February 1st, you've got a full year before you can apply, and then potentially another year, 11 months or so before something actually gets adopted. And it's a lengthy process. I believe the county, and Scott, you'll have to help me with this. I think the county used to have a provision where you could increase the nonconformity up to a certain percent, but I don't believe the county's code allows that anymore either. And so you know, I know that some cities are more generous on continuing non-conforming uses than others, but our legal advice and our policy since at least 2016 has been, you don't expand a non-conforming use. You can maintain it, you don't expand it. And so when these things come up, I wanted the council to be aware of what our policy is, and if that isn't right, you know, you could suggest that we include language in the comprehensive plan that direct the city to change that code section to allow more flexibility. But again, you know, we've got properties all over the place. The Bethel Corridor is an example where you've got a handful of single family houses that are zoned commercial. We want that to develop as a commercial corridor, and we really don't want somebody investing in the single family house to make it nicer when ultimately we're trying to get economic development in that area. And but it's ultimately the city council's decision, and if the committee wants to make a recommendation, you know, that's something we could potentially discuss with the full council, or you could just write it in your individual comments to the comp plan to say that, you know, we should be more flexible on non-conforming uses.
Well, first things first, I think asking somebody to approach with a rezone or reclassification is not going to be, in my mind, considered good advice, because what will often happen is now you've got an island of zoning surrounded by others, and while not technically illegal, it is poor planning. And so I don't see that as being very successful. On the other hand, if somebody wants to add an additional bedroom because of family needs or what have you, for, you know, residential use, maybe we should consider like a 10% square footage allowance for residential, not for non-conforming commercial. So that's my thought on it. I know that different jurisdictions look at nonconformities differently. Some are on the strict end. You know, we're not the most strict, but Port Orchard is pretty determined in its approach. The county is a little looser, and other jurisdictions probably are much looser. So those are my 2 cents.
I'll jump in.
Yeah. I was
you know, I guess my feeling is I'd love to give as much flexibility as we can. My concern always is unintended consequences down the road. And I agree fully with what Scott was saying, and I believe we're on the same on this, that, we don't want to do onesies. Like you were saying, Scott, making neighborhoods islands within the city. That is poor planning. I agree with that. But how do we give people more flexibility in their house if they wanted to do something? I would agree with. I don't know whether it's something where we say today, hey, Nick and Jim, can you come back with a proposal? Even if it's maintain our current, or the 10% you thought that the county was 25%. But again, those runs into what are unintended consequences. So I'd ask you to kind of weigh back in, Nick and Jim, on what you've seen and what you consider.
Yeah. I was pretty surprised when I read that or heard that in the about not really eligible to add a bedroom and whatnot. I see that more on the county side where it's more septic heavy and you're not adding bedrooms based off size of your septic systems. I totally get that. On the sewer side, which is most of the city, I was pretty surprised by that. But what Jay and Scott just said, I agree 100% with that. Yeah.
So-
I apologize for not having the right words for it right now, but reconsidering, portions of that.
So is there agreement with the council members to take a look at, for residential uses, allowing a 10% one-time growth opportunity?
Well, I think 10% is, if a house is 2,000 square feet, you're talking about add a 200 square foot bedroom onto that. For me, that sounds reasonable. But again, pretty sure that almost the whole city's on sewer, and that plays a huge part into it. You're not adding bedrooms based
Yeah,
off
and
the size of your septic system.
it's not so much about in my view, about sewer as it is about trying not to perpetuate a nonconformity that makes it even more difficult to come into compliance down the road.
True.
Um,
I'm in agreement with you. I think Jay might want to chime in if he is as well. But
I was trying to think about, our older properties. I mean, and now we'll get into specifics that, on this property, which I didn't look up, what is the square footage on some of our older properties? The average square footage of some of our downtown, are we talking mostly in the 1,200 to 1,500 range? So 10% would be 100 to 150 square feet. I think that would probably, not be, it'd be a small bedroom, but definitely a decent to put in a second bath or something. So maybe that is an appropriate number, 10%. Without trying to throw darts at a dartboard. Again, I'm looking for a little guidance here from Nick and Jim about it. Again, what is the consequence down the road? I don't feel bad about that. But it's again, we want to do what's good for all of the city, not just one house.
Yeah,
And
I
I'll just
think that go ahead, Scott.
I just was saying, and I'll emphasize that I think this should be an allowance for residential nonconformities and certainly not commercial.
Yeah, I was going to say a similar thing, and we haven't done any research, nor do we have the bandwidth to really tackle
Right.
this right now, which is why I think it is best addressed as a comprehensive plan policy at this time, if we were going to do something, and then let's implement this policy subsequent to completing the comprehensive plan project, because we're so swamped right now with various mandates and tasks that I don't want to take a whole bunch of staff time working on an ordinance sort of outside of that whole comprehensive planning process. So if you want to suggest that there be a comprehensive plan policy to allow this sort of thing, I would suggest either providing that comment individually, or if the whole committee agrees, we can maybe draft some language and bring it back for the committee's review next month and then provide it to the planning commission. Jim?
Yeah, I don't mean to speak out of turn here, but I mean, there's nothing worse when you're planner of the week and somebody calls you, says, I want to do this, and you have to inform them, sorry, you're non-conforming. Nobody takes any pleasure in that. But, and I agree with you all. I mean, the feeling that you can help people in this situation, that would be great. I would just say this, that in some situations where you have a non-conforming use, when somebody goes to sell their property, the lender won't lend on a non-conforming use. So simply allowing the expansion of a residential unit, that may not solve all the problems that are associated with the non-conforming use. So, for instance, the property at Lundberg and Harold, it was zoned commercial mixed use a few years ago. There's a single family home there. Those property owners came in and they rezoned the property to business professional, which does allow a detached house for that very reason, because the lender would not lend on it. So they wanted to clean it up. So I just want to put this out there that while we can help people in the short term, it does not necessarily implement the long-term goals of the comprehensive plan, nor it potentially does not solve the property owners' problems long-term.
Yeah, I can appreciate that.
Could we go forward at least to put it on next month's agenda to Nick, you had made kind of a proposal
Yeah.
for that, so we can kind of revisit, kind of think about this a little bit more, because I think we're all in agreement that we don't want to do a knee-jerk reaction, something that's just applied for one. I think we all agree that we're not interested in commercial. We're talking only about residential, and see, where we move from here. And I agree that it should be more in the comprehensive plan than an ordinance or some variation of that. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think Jim and I can look at it. I mean, writing a policy is coming up with 1 to 2 sentences that would be added to the comprehensive plan. So we can think about where could that possibly go, and what language might sort of lead to a policy change if that's the direction that this committee and the city council and planning commission want to go. We'll be sure to mention that we're working on this to the planning commission so that they can expect it potentially to come forward. And we'll bring it back to you at our next land use committee meeting, which the date of which is incidentally the next item on the agenda.
Yeah, have we beat that one up enough?
Actually, I think
so.
it was a good discussion.
Yeah. All right, May land use meeting.
Well, I am unavailable on May 15th. I have my mom is coming to visit because the Rolling Stones are in Seattle and I'm supposed to go see the Stones. So
They're still alive.
yeah. So anyway, I'm unavailable to attend on May 15th, and was wondering if we can reschedule that for another date. Obviously, we pushed this meeting back already once, so May 15th is only 3 weeks from now. So potentially the 22nd, if that works for everyone.
Yeah.
I'm good.
If we do the 22nd, would there be a way that might be able to bump it back a half hour
to 5 p.m. or bump it to 4?
No, yeah, to 4, to start at 4. I have an event I have to be at that evening in Tacoma, and so I am available. I'm gonna make it work regardless, but if we could bump it and have it start at 4 versus 4:30,
I'm good with 4.
I'm good with 4 on the 22nd.
Jim, does that work for you? All right, please update the calendar invite, and we will see you all again on the 22nd of May at 4 p.m.
Can I mention one
Okay.
thing before we hang up? last month we discussed the fireworks, and I know that the Kitsap Daily News has spoken to Scott, Jay, and myself. They reached out to me after our high school baseball game, and Elijah's a very, very nice man, but I told him like it wasn't really the place, for me to answer a question on council discussions. There wasn't the right mindset, but there is an article on it coming out Friday.
Okay.
So just a heads up. It's going to come out. It's going to go on social media as everyone else does. And it's going to be a really hot topic. And he called me on Monday. I wasn't really able to talk to him. I just told him, if what you heard me say in the land use discussion, I still hold to that. So that's all he would use on my end. But that is coming out Friday. So it could be a pretty hot topic. Just a heads up. He told me it's coming out Friday. His goal is to print it on Friday.
Yeah.
We've gone through this before. This is nothing.
I know. Just want to let you know.
Don't,
And I hope he covers that 2 out of 3 residents supported a ban
Yeah.
in spite of a handful of commercial people who did not.
Yeah. I care about what residents think as well. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just since we did, oh, go ahead.
Oh, and for my part, I said I'm withholding my judgment until the public hearing because that's what I'm obligated to do.
same.
I'm 1 of 7.
I just wanted to share with you, since we didn't get to talk about this at work study last week, but the mayor did that fireworks survey back in 2022. I
Yeah.
wasn't part of processing the data at that time, but when I went back and looked at it, I realized that when they were reporting the reason why people were opposed to things, they were taking each category, like the risk of injury, impacts on people, and they were looking at the total number of responses for all categories. And so it was showing like 13% of people were concerned about injury. It was actually 13% of all responses in all categories were concerned with energy. And so I went back through and cleaned up the data, and the updated presentation that was in your packet last week, and then what will be in your packet at the May work study meeting, just it presents that data in a little bit easier to understand way. When I first saw the results get shared 2 years ago, I was scratching my head looking at the data saying, I don't think this makes sense, and I want to see the raw information. But hopefully the data is more usable now.
Could we get that sent to us well in advance of the packet?
Just the results?
Yeah, the retailer results. I'd like to be able to.
Yeah, I'll resend it to you now. It was in the packet last week, but I can
okay.
send an email.
Okay, all right.
Hey, life is good, guys. Trust me. So
Yeah, how you doing there?
good. I just I know this is land use and not anything, but I was able to take a picture of my helmet, and if anybody would like to see what an impact does and a reason to wear a helmet, I'd be more than glad to send it to you. I just got a note back from my brother, and it was "wow" in all caps with 3 exclamation marks. So it's all good. So
I thought for sure you got hurt off a ladder, like doing all your work you've been doing. I thought for sure it was a ladder issue.
It was the last mile of a long ride, and I was telling Jim beforehand, who knew that you hit black ice in April in Port Orchard, but that's what happens when you have a hailstorm. So
Absolutely.
So anyway, thanks for sharing, Scott. Thank you, Jim, Nick, and have a great graduation, Eric.
Thanks.
For
Thank you.
the family.
Appreciate all the hard work, guys. Take care.
All right, bye everybody.
Thanks.